What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of So What Was Your Welcome to the League moment? As always, I'm your host, Zach Cronin, and today we are going to be talking about Paul George signing with the Philadelphia 76ers and how a few days ago, Paul George, arguably the biggest free agent in this year's class, inked a 4-year, $212 million deal to go play for Philadelphia. They now have a big three that includes Joel Embiid, PG, and a recently signed Tyrese Maxey, who also inked a max contract for like 205 or 206 million dollars. Over the last couple of years, there's been a market shift from the big three super team to the two superstar super team. I talked about this when I covered the Celtics winning the championship. That is undeniably a super team. You have two max contract players, as well as Drew Holiday, who's extraordinarily talented, Kristaps Porzingis, who's extraordinarily talented as well. But it doesn't have the same shoehorned feel as a super team because everybody fits well and all of the acquisitions were organic. The reason the league has transitioned away from the big three that includes LeBron, D Wade, and Chris Bosh, Steph, Clay, and Draymond is because there's so much talent now that organizations don't need to rely on superstars to carry them to a championship. You look at Boston, you look at Denver, you look at the Lakers a couple years ago, you look at the Milwaukee Bucks, you look at the most recent champions, none of them have really a big three. I mean, you could kind of argue that the Bucks had a big three with Giannis and Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday, but I would not argue that they were just a very well put together team. So GMs have learned that they can develop guys upcoming through the draft. They can sign free agents who fit whatever holes they may be in their team and not go the way of the Phoenix Suns, who effectively mortgage all of their assets for Bradley Beal, who doesn't fit within that unit. With all of that said, I do not think that Paul George is a bad signing for Philadelphia. I recorded a video that I never released for some reason where I pretended to be Daryl Morey and I built a team that would hopefully allow Philly to contend for a championship. And there were two ways they could have went about it. They could have either signed only Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid and went out and signed a handful of very good free agents. I'm thinking Jonas Valanciunas, Tyus Jones, re-sign Kelly Oubre, which they did, re-sign Buddy Hield. But there was also a world in which I believe that they were going to sign Paul George because it wouldn't make sense for them not at least to not negotiate something because Paul George is not only a terrific player, but he fits well within the system of this team. So you sign Paul George, you do have a little bit of money to play with depending on how much ownership is willing to shell out with the luxury tax and the first apron, whatever. So not only did they sign Paul George, they re-signed Kelly Oubre, they signed Andre Drummond, and they also signed Eric Gordon. But I'm not really gonna get into the Eric Gordon signing because I don't know how much of an impact player he's gonna be. But just looking at this roster, how it stands right now: Embiid, Paul George, Maxey, Kelly Oubre, Paul Reed, and Andre Drummond is a good foundation. The only hole that they have right now is backup point guard. If I'm Daryl Morey, I'm looking at Monte Morris. I think Monte Morris would be an exceptional acquisition for this team, a legitimate floor general facilitator who can play a hands-off role and allow Embiid or PG or even he can play alongside Tyrese Maxey as well and just allow them to exist within the flow of the offense. I think the coming together of this big three was also rather organic. As I mentioned before, Paul George is not the kind of guy who is going to struggle to integrate into the system. Really, wherever he's gone, Paul George has fit in very well. His game is very versatile. He's very malleable. He went from being the focal point in Indiana to going to Oklahoma City, where he averaged, what was it, like 27 points. He was an MVP candidate. He then goes and plays in LA alongside Kawhi Leonard. This guy, when it comes to being a versatile three level scorer, he's a spacer, he's a shot creator. He can get shots off in the mid range. He can play in the post as well. There is no reluctance about him also operating as a cutter, as a slasher, filling spaces in the defense. He brings a very he brings a fantastic dynamic to whatever team he signs with. Additionally, he has become a better playmaker as he's gotten older, more mature, as he's come to understand basketball. I mean, this guy's, holy fuck, he's 34 years old. I knew he was in his 30s, but I don't know. I think as I've gotten older, I don't know if this is a thing, and I'm going on a tangent here, I know. But the guys who I watched when I were in high school, for whatever reason, I still feel that they're only like 25, 26, 27 years old. Like, I knew that Paul George was older, but also another thing is that his game hasn't really deteriorated. He's been in the league for 14 seasons or 13 seasons, whatever it is. Anyway, you also factor in Paul George being an all defensive caliber player, potentially even a defensive player of the year candidate as well, depending on how good his supporting cast is. I don't foresee him having any issues playing alongside Joel Embiid. He brings, again, shooting is paramount when you have a back to the basket center. Paul George brings that. He can also play in the pick and roll with Tyrese Maxey, whether it's him setting the screen or whether it's him receiving passes off of the screen. When you're a team like Philadelphia and you're in the Eastern Conference and there is a squad as dominant as Boston, when you build your team, you are not only building it the same way that the Celtics built it, but you're constructing a roster that can match up with that team as perfectly as possible. And as it stands right now, you have Joel Embiid, you have two wing defenders in Paul George and Kelly Oubre. Oubre is a much needed re-signing for them as well. I felt that he should have been a priority because he is the Michael Jordan of PJ Washington's, I feel like, or maybe the Kevin Durant of PJ Washington's is a better comparison. You also have a very dynamic young guard, as we saw in these postseasons. Tyrese Maxey is the perimeter shot creator that Philadelphia so desperately needed. He has a new contract. He's coming off of an all-star season. He is about to enter his prime, and he can go bucket for bucket with anybody in the Eastern Conference and anybody in the NBA. Additionally, you have Andre Drummond, who I felt was a fantastic acquisition for them as well. A prolific rebounder, a big body on the interior. You may not get the same defensive performance as you would from like a Jonathan Isaac, but Drummond is still a massive presence around the basket. Just the sheer size that he has. He is gigantic, and he will be vital for them during those stretches when Embiid is resting and, God forbid, when he is hurt. But more than that, he is a reliable rebounder. He really is the Moses Malone of this generation. There is no rebound that eludes him, and they now finally have a legitimate backup center. As I mentioned at the top, the only thing that they're really missing right now is that backup point guard, because when Maxey goes to the bench, you don't have anybody who can conduct the offense. And as we've seen, that is crucial. You need a reliable floor general who can execute with the second unit. I know that Embiid is fantastic. I know that Paul George is fantastic, but they just don't have that point guard gene. So Monte Morris would be huge for them. In a perfect world, they would sign Tyus Jones, but I think that he's going to command a lot more than they're going to be willing to shell out. I believe that Tyus Jones's market value right now for a guy who's like 15-7 is going to be around 16, 17, 18 million dollars. Monte Morris is more realistic at like 8, 9, or 10 million. If this Celtics team that just won the title is anything to base your team around going forward, it's that you really only need 6 or 7 quality pieces. The variance of that quality depends on the pieces that you have. Like, obviously the Celtics have 2 superstars in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and then Drew Holiday, great. Derek White, great. Kristaps Porzingis, great. It varies. As it stands right now, Philly has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I will throw Paul Reed in there as well. So we look at Philly, and they have 6 foundational players. Embiid, MVP if he doesn't get hurt this year. Paul George, perennial All-NBA. Tyrese Maxey, perennial All-NBA. Andre Drummond fills a role that they desperately need. Kelly Oubre, premier 3-and-D guy, 15 points on like 38% shooting from 3 this season. Paul Reed, backup center, but I think that he's going to be wind up more of an energy guy, a vibes guy, and that kind of player is very important to championship teams. If you add Monty Morris to this roster, the East gets way more interesting up at the top, not only with Philadelphia and Boston, but also New York. Despite losing Isaiah Hartenstein, I think that they have a incredible team put together for this season, especially since they were able to retain OG. I can't count out Milwaukee as much as I would like to because of Doc Rivers. They still have Giannis. Giannis is probably the most dominant player in the NBA right now. It's going to be a bloodbath at the top of the East. I think that as it stands, Boston is the best team in the conference, and they should be the favorites to represent the conference again. But it's not as wide open as it was like last week. It's not as wide open as it was before free agency started. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this video out. Thank you guys so very much for coming to hang out with me today. As always, everything I'm associated with is down in the description box below. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Drop a comment as well. It really helps out with the algorithm. If you do any of those 3 things, you'll become my new favorite person. And with that, I will see y'all in the next one.